A PlayStation State of Play, all for Final Fantasy 16? They're really pushing the marketing button to get this thing launching to the moon with hype, or we have ourselves a seriously heavy new installment for the Final Fantasy franchise. Now, I'm not a Final Fantasy fanboy, and I can't tell you every inch of lore there is, but I am someone who's been playing Final Fantasy games since I started gaming as a kid in the 90s. Final Fantasy VII being my first experience. Talk about getting acclimated to a series. That game is amazing. I still get nostalgic goosebumps anytime I play or talk about it. I even bought the guidebook back in the day and spent time looking at that even when I wasn't playing. Needless to say, after Final Fantasy VII, I was always excited to try the next Final Fantasy title, or Square Enix game for that matter. Now, I don't want to get stuck too much in the past, because I want to talk about what we got to see for Final Fantasy 16 in the extended look during the PlayStation State of Play. Now, if you don't already know, you play as main character Clive. He's the eldest son of Archduke Rosaria. Clive's duty is to protect his youngest sibling, Joshua, as Joshua inherited the dominant of the Phoenix. So he is sworn to protect Joshua for what I can assume is for the rest of his life. I like this perspective of the story. It's a bit more gritty, as we play a less valued son, if you will, so we can only expect some awesome coming-to-be story that really makes Clive rise high. Now, I'm putting this on myself, but because of the backstory, I am really hoping for something that will be considered a classic 20 years from now. Fingers crossed. We got to hear a bit more about the story from the producer in the State of Play, and one of the highlights that stood out to me the most was the timeline. You get to experience Clive's life during 3 time periods: his teens at 15, his 20s, and finally his 30s. It will be interesting to see how much of this, if at all, helps retain the emotional commitment to Clive as the story progresses. With a dark and more medieval setting that more closely resembles the first Final Fantasy games, I think this one's gonna mark its spot in Final Fantasy history. Now let's talk a little bit more about gameplay and combat. Here's the thing that seems to be a major factor in Final Fantasy titles moving forward. Turn-based games seem to not be taking hold on people like it used to, and it's clear Square Enix is slowly moving away from it. Me personally, if I want to play a turn-based RPG, I'll probably go back to my roots in old games. It just isn't something I'm seeking right now for a new game. I would love to hear you guys' opinion on the matter, so let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I digress. With the turn-based going away, we've seen some shifts in playstyle recently in Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy 15, taking that turn-based tactic and attempting to put it into a real-time combat by slowing time heavily so you can choose certain attacks or commands for your other party members. With Final Fantasy 16, they are really going for a true ARPG, with intense, non-stop combat and even losing controlled party members. Kind of. I'll get into that in a second. The combat in Final Fantasy 16 looks amazing. It's fast-paced, offers a ton of movement, some cool timing mechanics, the classic Final Fantasy damage number system, and seamless cinematic combat sequences. Something like the recent God of War games do. That honestly makes the combat more immersive, so I love this addition. But for those wanting a more story-driven experience, they do have some backup plan for that in the form of accessories. You can choose to start the game with an option called Story-Focused Mode, which gives those players special accessories to increase timing on dodges and timing mechanics. So the turn-based-ish elements are still squeaking their way through, if that's what you prefer. Plus, we get something I'm thinking any Final Fantasy fan has been waiting for: controlling your icons by hand. That's right. Take control of iconic summons throughout Final Fantasy history, and have damn near Godzilla-sized in-your-face combat. This shit's gonna be sweet, man. Now, the other cool tie-in to these icons is your skill set and talents. They're directly related to icons, giving you summoned-inspired abilities. I can't express how cool this is. Just by some of the previews, I think we'll really be in for a treat. Now, getting back to what I mentioned earlier, you'll run into allies along the way, but you won't be able to command them, or I believe even swap them out, as you can in other Final Fantasy titles. Instead, they are AI-controlled companions that are said to fill in nicely with your playstyle. I have some concerns with this, but I'll have to save my judgments until I get my hands on it. You do, however, get a companion that always stays with you, Torgal. This is a badass doggo that supposedly stays with you at all times, and you can give him commands. So we aren't quite losing that commanding party element that we thought. Making another God of War comparison here, it feels like it may be very similar in the ways of how Kratos commands his son Atreus, and I'm here for it. It honestly makes the most sense for real-time combat and fast decision-making. Now let's talk a little bit about the world. It still seems like for the most part, it's on the down low. The producer has mentioned it's not quite an open world game, but it's also not linear. He said, "In past interviews, I've mentioned that Final Fantasy XVI is not an open world game. But what exactly does that mean? Does it mean it's linear? Again, not exactly. To bring players a wide variety of environments in highest quality possible and ultimately enhancing the game experience, we selected several areas that we wanted to focus on, and created those in extreme detail. I think this essentially means that there will be zones that can be revisited freely, but they are not all connecting. Probably something similar to Destiny's worlds, almost like small open worlds, but are separated from the other areas. There are a few components that point to this type of level world system. For one, the map allows fast travel to these different zones, and two, there is a hub known as the Hideaway. This is the area where you can visit things like merchants, quest givers, blacksmiths for creating and modifying new weapons and gear, a training simulator with online scoreboard, and the hunt board. The hunt board is the other component that makes me think we'll have these smaller separated open world zones. You can hunt down beasts for their bounty by picking them up from the hunt board, and this guy, of course.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, look, it's a Moogle! So for me personally, as long as it's not a super linear path, I'm not really opposed to this, especially if it helps build an incredible story and journey. Right now, Final Fantasy XVI is set to release June 22nd, so I'm sure we'll get even more info in the coming months. I'm very excited for this one, and I think you guys now know my reasons. So what are your guys' thoughts? Fans or not? I'd love to hear. And if you guys want more content like this, plus game reviews and game deals, make sure to hit that subscribe button. As always, thank you guys for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.